Hello, folks, and happy 4th of July weekend. DeeDee here today for our first July art journaling page. And today we're going to go over incorporating our handwriting into our artwork. I get a lot of questions about this, so I thought I would take a few seconds here and kind of go over just some things I've learned and picked up and I practice and such. We are handwriting in the background, and then we'll use some stamps to kind of make some of it stick out, and then work on putting the rest of it, kind of hiding it in our background. So when I am using my handwriting, I have kind of started using a number 2 pencil a lot in my artwork, and I think it's very fun. I love the graphite feel and the color and the texture that is added to my artwork. But when I'm working on my handwriting, so I want it to not be legible, I squish my letters together. Sometimes I run some of them over each other. Instead of, like, if I were to write the word love, I would write the O, the V, and the E over each other so that it's a bit scribbly. And then also often I make my swoops and my tails extra tall and extra long, and all of my curves and my circles are very exaggerated. And I never leave out punctuation, and that's because I feel like it adds just one more element of weirdness to my handwriting. So I spent some time and filled this entire page kind of going over some things. Eventually, I would like to open an art studio, and so that's kind of what I wrote about, all my plans and ideas for an art studio. And then I used a Viva Las Vegas stamps rubber stamp that I designed. It's on an art journaling plate, and I'll make sure to link to that. I used that in 5 places on my background. 2 of them are going off the page, and I kind of talked about this to the girls at art journaling today. But I'm very linear, and even sometimes I like actually draw a border on my page. So today and during this process, I really wanted things to not have a specific edge and for them to flow and ebb and kind of just go off the edge of the page. So I took that stamp, and while I was stamping it, 2 of the 5 times I stamped it off the page. I am working on Canson watercolor paper, just so you know, and I'm working on the smooth side, not the textured side. While I was stamping, I would rotate the stamp so that the thicker part was in some different areas, and that way it didn't look like the exact same stamp stamped over and over. And then I used some Blick gesso to cover up the areas outside of the stamp, and I left the areas inside of the stamp alone so that my handwriting showed through, and now it's an element in my background. As I'm going over the background with the gesso, I am letting the handwriting peek through in some areas. And then also, because I use a number 2 graphite pencil, my gesso is picking up some of that graphite and turning gray in some places, which is really great for me because it just adds kind of like a really nice body or background to it. And after that was dry, I picked up this doodle scallop border, another stamp that I designed for the LVS, and I am stamping it along the top. It doesn't have to be perfect. The really great thing about the stamp is that it can be stamped over and over and over, and it doesn't get too repetitive. I had a lot of fun designing this whole plate of stamps, and we'll be using one more in just a few minutes here. I recently got my hands on some Stabilo woodies, which are these magnificent giant colored crayons. And I'm kind of outlining all of my pieces. And then I've gotten a medium-sized round brush and some water. And I'm now activating that color of the Stabilo. I picked up the 18 set, and so this one is teal. It's got some delicious color to it. And I use that word when I'm really excited about something. I've kind of been using this teal on a lot of projects, and I'm definitely using my woodies on a lot of projects recently. So you've probably seen those linked on my blog post fairly frequently. What I really like about them is that if I'm a little bit unhappy maybe, or like if the color gets too washed out, it's super easy to add some more back in. And I am really, really enjoying that. And it's easy to work with. Also, some of the other water-soluble products that I have used tend to leave behind kind of a scribble mark if you end up scribbling too hard. And so far, I have not done that with the woodies. So that was a big bonus for me. With my paintbrush in the water, I am feathering out or creating an ombre or gradient effect with these so that the color is very intense where it meets the stamp, and then as it goes out into the page, it kind of fades away. And I've done that around all 5 circles as well as the border at the top. And I do splatter a little bit of the color around here and there. And I made sure that everything was dry. And now I've gotten out another stamp that I designed for Viva Las Vegas Stamps. It's a writing chevron. And I have stamped it in archival ink black soot by Ranger. So I picked up a blank ink pad and the black soot re-inker and then just made my own archival pad that way. I'm not fond of those giant pads with the 4 different colors in them. This is some Wow embossing powder in black, and it's just straight embossing powder, no glitter or anything like that. I love this for when I'm stamping occasionally, especially now because I went over my background with gesso and then I tried to stamp my writing background on top of it. I knew what was going to happen before I even did it. But, so the stamp came out very uneven and not very pretty. Luckily, when you use embossing powder, and especially if you use colored embossing powder, when it melts together, it kind of fills in some of those missing gaps. So I was able to really get a nice crisp image from those stamps. Plus, the embossing is going to resist anything that I add around it. So it's kind of a 2-for-1. It was really nice. I always have 2 bottles of well, 3 bottles, I guess, of embossing powder sitting on my desk. I have black, white, and clear. They come in fairly handy. And you can see here, I'm going back in some of my colors I felt, I mentioned earlier, got a little washed out maybe while I was working on some things. So just adding a little bit more intensity. And I kind of played back and forth with the idea of adding a different color. And I didn't end up going with that, but what I will do eventually is get out my Stabilo Marxall pencil, and I'll use that kind of graphite color to add in some gray. Oh yeah, so I was telling the girls in class, like, while you have so much pigment loaded into your brush, feel free, of course, to splatter it around your page. I love doing things like that and kind of carrying the color all around. And it's very easy to do when you're activating the Stabilo Woody and you have all that color kind of sucked onto your brush. Because fairly frequently I find myself dipping it into the water to dilute the color so that I could fade out that gradient some more. And in the end, I should have just been splattering it around my page. You can see here now I've got the Stabilo Marxall out, and I did go around the edges of the stamps, and then I used the same brush and water to just feather that out. The great thing about these woodies and the Stabilo Marxall is that I was able to sop up some of that extra Marxall color, the graphite that had kind of, oops, sorry, that was my phone, that had kind of gotten inside my stamp there. And you can see here I'm going back in and kind of blending the 2 colors together, and I'll do some teal and some graphite and kind of just marry them together a bit so that they're not just separate colors or they're not like color blocked on the page. I want it to be fairly cohesive. Now I'm creating a mask. And I didn't even really re-ink the stamp. I just kind of used ink that was left over on it. And I'm not worrying about the dots that go around the outside of the stamp as much as just the really dark, heavy part. I'm going to put that down. And here's a stamp that I hand carved out of an eraser. And I'm using the same archival black soot ink. And then I'm just stamping it now into the background. After I had the chevrons and I got all my color on the page, it felt fairly heavy on the right. I keep using the word fairly. That's kind of funny. It felt really heavy on the right from those embossed chevrons, and I needed to kind of get a little more black over on the left side. So I picked up this hand-carved stamp, and that really seemed to do the trick after I had it stamped. And it's great because I can stamp it over and over, and it doesn't look incredibly repetitive, and it's just a fun texture. And then making sure everything's perfectly dry. The thing about the Stabilo woodies is that they will reactivate with water. They're not permanent after they've dried. So as I'm kind of playing with these X's and having fun with this, trying to get in some more color, you'll notice that some of that color underneath does start to move. And in some places it was really dark. The color happens very quickly. So I sopped some of that back up just with a baby wipe or a paper towel. And you'll see here I'm going to do a little bit of stenciling, but I actually end up wiping it off. I wasn't that happy with how it turned out, and that's the really great thing about mixed media. It's always really easy to change things. If you're not happy with how it goes, you can cover it up, you can scrape it off, you can redo an area, and this far into a page, very rarely do I throw a whole page out. It does happen. I'm not going to lie. I have gone through quite a few minutes on a piece and did one thing, maybe added a color or something that I was really unhappy with, and it was something that I couldn't remove. So I would throw that out. But this is, I'm so far into this page and I'm loving everything else about it that even when I pick up that stencil and I'm not happy, I just know that I need to wipe it off right away. And you'll see I do pick up some of the color a little bit. I mentioned that those woodies are still water reactive, even after they've already been wet once and then dried, where some other products would be permanent. So I'm just going to color back in a little bit of the color and re-wet it, and I'm good to go. Then it looks fabulous and perfect like it did before I messed up with the stencil. As a final little note, I took some scraps of some music note text and I sewed them to the page in the bottom left-hand corner. And that's it. You could staple them or glue them if you like. Thanks so much for joining me today. Be sure to subscribe and hop on over to my Society 6 to see some products you can purchase using this art journal design. Thank you.